and an energy policy that has driven costs higher than any competing nation. No one is more responsible for this than the Energy Secretary and the Prime Minister who appointed him. Mr. Speaker, no one denies that steelmaking has been difficult for some time, but Scunthorpe is the victim of a dishonesty that pretends it is better for the environment to ship coke halfway around the planet than from down the road.
Ed Miliband walked out of Parliament as MPs confronted him about his role in the UK steel crisis. This wasn't just a casual exit, it was a telling moment that revealed volumes about his approach to accountability. With the steel industry hanging by a thread and only 3 working days left to save primary steel production, Miliband chose to flee rather than face the music. Was this the action of a man with nothing to hide, or the desperate escape of someone who knows his policies have failed catastrophically? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
We have to be realistic. I see that the Secretary of State for Net Zero has now left, but get real. You know, we can take it into public ownership now, but if we go on loading these costs in our industry, we will be coming back month after month, year after year.
Edward Lee.
Why is Scunthorpe paying almost twice as much in energy costs as in South Korea or in America? We have to stop these green energy costs.
What if the UK's once mighty steel industry could be reduced to a mere footnote in our economic history? That's exactly what's happening right now. Let's be clear about what we're witnessing. The UK steel industry, once the backbone of British manufacturing, has withered to a shadow of its former self. The decline isn't subtle or gradual anymore. It's a freefall. Charts tracking steel output tell a grim story, with production levels plummeting since the 1990s, after already falling substantially from their 1960s peak. This isn't just economic data, it represents shattered communities and livelihoods hanging by a thread. We're now at a critical juncture where primary steel production in Britain faces complete extinction. The situation is so dire that blast furnaces are literally days away from being permanently extinguished. Only 3 working days remain to secure orders for coal and iron pellets, the lifeblood of steel production. Miss this deadline, and the UK becomes the only major economy without primary steelmaking capability. The financial reality is equally stark. British Steel's Chinese owner is abandoning ship, unwilling to continue hemorrhaging an astounding £700,000 daily. This withdrawal threatens to leave British taxpayers holding the bag for potential bailouts, while thousands of skilled workers face unemployment in communities where alternative jobs simply don't exist. But here's what makes this especially infuriating. This isn't merely about global market forces.
In the country. I mean, Ed Miliband actually, he's gone out of his way to make sure that the truth never comes out.
Right.
About Richard Tice, saying that Richard Tice was lying about net zero. I mean, Ed Miliband and his energy department are the biggest source of disinformation on the net zero. You go back to Claire Coutinho's time under the Conservatives as energy minister. She actually commissioned a full costing of net zero. First thing Ed Miliband did when he got in power was to cancel it.
Right.
He just doesn't want people to know the truth.
UK industrial users currently pay the most expensive electricity costs in the world. Let that sink in. Not just higher than some competitors, but the highest globally. This crippling disadvantage makes it virtually impossible for British steel to compete internationally, creating an unsustainable business environment by design rather than circumstance. These extortionate energy prices aren't random or accidental. They're the direct result of green energy policies implemented with seemingly no consideration for their impact on heavy industry. Politicians champion these initiatives, while apparently never bothering to calculate the industrial casualties their policies would create. When we overlay the timeline of the steel industry's decline with the implementation of specific climate and energy policies, the correlation is undeniable. Time and again, theoretical environmental gains were prioritised over practical industrial sustainability, with no meaningful protections put in place for sectors that simply cannot function under such conditions. The moment of truth for any politician comes when they must face the consequences of their decisions. For Ed Miliband, that reckoning arrived in Parliament during the steel crisis debate. And his response spoke volumes. When MPs directly connected his past policies to the industry's collapse, Miliband didn't stand his ground or offer solutions. Instead, he simply walked out of the chamber, abandoning the very discussion about an industry his policies had helped undermine. As Energy Secretary under Gordon Brown, Miliband wasn't implementing minor adjustments to Britain's energy landscape. He was fundamentally transforming it. His signature on numerous green initiatives sent industrial electricity costs soaring to unprecedented heights. These weren't unintended consequences, but predictable outcomes of policies that prioritise theoretical climate targets over the practical needs of energy-intensive industries competing in global markets. The parliamentary confrontation exposed a glaring blind spot in Miliband's vision. While pursuing environmental credentials, he apparently never calculated the devastating industrial impact of his energy strategy. The steel sector, which requires enormous amounts of reliable, affordable energy, became collateral damage in a policy agenda that offered no meaningful protections for British manufacturers facing international competitors with significantly lower energy costs. In this leadership vacuum, Nigel Farage has stepped forward with uncharacteristic urgency, declaring that there has to be an immediate nationalisation of this plant, an immediate nationalisation of primary steel production in Britain. It has to happen before the end of this week. This demand for decisive action stands in stark contrast to Keir Starmer's approach, which has mainly consisted of vague statements rather than concrete proposals to rescue the imperiled industry. Adding to the controversy, the Taxpayers Alliance recently revealed Miliband's own carbon-intensive lifestyle, documenting £62,712 spent on air travel since Labour came into power. This apparent disconnect between personal behaviour and public policy raises uncomfortable questions. How can someone who advocates policies that cripple British industry through increased energy costs justify their own substantial carbon footprint? The bitter irony for thousands of steelworkers facing unemployment is that their industry's demise wasn't inevitable. It was accelerated by specific policy choices championed by figures like Miliband, who created an impossible business environment through green levies and carbon pricing mechanisms without considering the competitive realities of global steel production. What we're witnessing in Britain's steel crisis isn't merely industrial decline, it's a damning failure of political accountability. Ed Miliband walking out during parliamentary questioning symbolises a broader pattern where politicians refuse to face the consequences of their decisions. The UK now suffers from the highest energy costs in the developed world, directly resulting from policies championed by the very same individuals now avoiding responsibility. While Miliband exits the chamber, Keir Starmer remains conspicuously absent from meaningful engagement with the crisis altogether. This political class has systematically undermined British manufacturing through their decisions, then abandoned the communities left devastated in their wake. The question now isn't just about saving steel, it's about whether our democracy can still hold its leaders accountable.